Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Creating Inclusive Training Environments. Tonight, you've got myself who will be presenting and Nathan Stevens, who are both from Disability Sport Wales, and my name is Simon Jones. I just forget to say that. Both from Disability Sport Wales. So we'll get started in a minute, but what I'll do, I'll give you some housekeeping rules. The hands up function is not working, I'm afraid, so obviously don't press that. If you've got any technical issues, can you please write it in the chat box, and Zoe from Welsh Athletics will hopefully help you out. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, please put it in the questions box and we'll come back to it at the end, because at the end of it, we're going to have a question and answer session. So if you think of any questions you want to, write them down in that chat box and then we will answer them at the end of this session. So today we'll crack on. So again, course outcomes, very similar to the first webinar. Apply inclusive practice into your sessions. Identify sources of reliable further information and guidance relevant to physical activity, including disability sport. So that's what we're going to go over today. We'll have a little quick recap from the first session and we'll get straight into how to use aim and step. So again, once again, if you haven't been with us before, these are the contact details for Disability Sport Wales. So you've got the Cardiff office on the left-hand side and you've got the North Wales office on the right-hand side. And also you've got the website address there. So I remember last time was a question about how can we get hold of any of the disability sports development officers that are based throughout Wales. If you go to that website at the bottom there, disabilitysportwales.com, you can find all the details for every single officer, and we have one in every single authority. Cool. So quick recap from last week. The functional approach. This is how the approach that Disability Sport Wales like to use, and I would love everybody to use when it comes to sport and physical activity. So it considers the functional ability of the athlete. This is basically how somebody moves and thinks about what they can do. Talked about person-centered coaching last time. This is all about person-centered coaching, about trying to find out what the person can do, what their movement is. Have they got good core strength? Can they throw it with their left arm, their right arm? What sports have they played in the past? What do they want to do in the future? It's also kind of trying to find as much information about that individual as possible. And thinking of other things to do as well, you've got to assess the impact of this on their chosen sport and activity. So again, if somebody's got quite, say, poor core strength, when they play wheelchair basketball, what type of chair do they need to play in? Is it more of a bucket seat? Is it more of a upright seat? Same when it comes to throws and say, that's called athletics. Can they practice from the actual wheelchair, or can they maneuver themselves into a throwing chair or a throwing station and actually take part that way? It's all about thinking about what can they do and how can we make it easier for them to take part. Determines how an environment affects a person's functional ability. So again, this could be, I know, linking it back to Jenner Park in Barry. From October onwards, it's quite cold, so that could affect some people. Could affect some athletes with certain impairments taking part. If it's really cold, their muscles may be very stiff and may not actually perform as well as they can do in the middle of the summer. So think about how can we sort of improve our environments? Would it be best then for a session to take place indoors during the winter? Lots of things like that to think about. How can we make it suitable for individuals taking part? And we look about what other factors can impinge on a person's ability to take part. So again, it could be somebody with autism, and if their routine is they know their coaches turn up every single week, and for 1 week that coach has gone on holiday or they're ill, how can we let that person know in advance? So that may be another factor that can impinge on a person's ability to take part, because their routine is off then, and they may think, actually, my routine is not right, I don't want to take part today. And we want them to take part every week. It's all about thinking about the individual and how can we learn as much as we can about them. Again, recap of aim and step. So I won't fly through this one. But as you see here, you've got the model of inclusion, so the activity inclusion model. And again, you've got loads of different sort of things going on in this one. So the most important part to this is the participant right in the middle. That's the person that we want to take part in an activity. And there's loads of different settings they could take part in, but there's also different what's called elements that could affect what setting they take part in. So again, we've got your open setting where there's no modification involved, and they can just take part in, say, your mainstream athletics club with everybody else. You've got your parallel session, so it's almost grouping by ability. So for certain aspects of training, there could be for example, a disability-specific group, and then at the end of it, because that's basically their ability-wise, they're suited best in that activity. Then for other activities, they come back together and they train within sort of non-disabled athletes. You've also got the modified activity. So a good example of this is obviously a guide runner. That's always a modified activity. You've offered that person the opportunity to say, would you like a guide runner? They could take part with your session with a slight modification. And they could take part in a mainstream session with non-disabled athletes. All they have is somebody running with them. And that's the only modification they need. And it's usually the simplest modification is the best one, I would say. So don't try to overcomplicate it. You've also got a specific session. So that could be a disability athletics club or disability athletics session or group. That will have much more beneficial for some athletes than it could be trying to go to an open activity. I know we always say, find out, okay, inclusion is the best way forward, get them involved with everybody else. But for that individual, they may prefer a disability specific session. And it's all about us working with that individual to find out what's best for them. It's not us telling them, and it's not them telling us, so you have to do this, because we can't always provide everything in every single athletics club. So it's all about how can we, something that suits best for everybody, and no one sort of tells anybody else what to do. You've also got STEP. So again, it's a great way to break down activities. And this is where it's, everyone loves an acronym in sports. So STEP is the sort of, we have the four main areas we look at when we try to adapt sessions. So again, we've got space, how can we adapt the area people are playing in? Like I say, another great example could be giving for example, a wheelchair racer or a visually impaired athlete 2 lanes in a session, just in case they do need that extra room, it can stop collisions, or just they may feel safe for themselves. That's what's called an example of adapting space that you've got. Task, how can we adapt the task? So again, going back to, it can be giving that person a guide runner. That's the easiest way you can think about it. Adapting a task, or even sort of throw-in wise as well. How can we adapt that throw to make that person take part? Because they may not be able to transfer from their chair to a throwing frame. So how can we think about actually, when we want to learn the basic skills of throwing, can they do it in their sports chair? That's how we sort of think about, okay, we might have to adapt the task a little bit for that individual. You've also got equipment. So what can everybody use to take part? This could cover this huge range of equipment you can use in athletics. It comes down to sort of tethers for guide runners. It could be different forms of, or different weights of throwing objects. It could be different styles. So you've got the club throw where they throw a club, almost like a 10-pin bowling pin. That could be more beneficial for a person to use rather than a discus. Even people wearing sort of high-vid colored bibs. So if they do have a visually impaired athlete, they can see the sort of other runners who are around them much easier than, for example, if somebody's wearing a dark color clothes on a night they can't see. So that can be much more useful for somebody else. And think about people who are taking part in the activity and how can we make it fair? So if you do have an individual who comes along and wants to take part in the 100, for their classification in disability athletics, they may be a world beater, very quick, but compared to a non-disabled runner, they may be a couple of seconds behind. So you think, would you always want to place them with those athletes and race them in the exact same distances, exact same times, and expect the same outcomes? May not be the case there. You may think, actually, for this exercise, we'll give individual sort of goals, so there's people taking part rather than competing against each other, because again, it's not on a level playing field. So that's what we're going to use now. I'm going to give you some examples of hopefully how we can use STEP, and hopefully it can relate to your athletics club as well. So we've gone for a throw, a run, and a jump. And I've used also a physical impairment, a sensory impairment, and a learning disability as well. So we're kind of covering the main areas or the main sort of impairment groups along with the main activities in athletics. So this is our first athlete. So her name's Hannah. She wants to take part in the long jump. So first of all, impairment comes below functionability, if you notice there, because we want to find out what they can do. Impairment comes along. It's useful to know the impairment, but from my point of view as a coach, I want to know what they can do before I know what their impairment is. So you say functionability. Takes part in school PE and sports days, plays football at a local learning disabilities team, loves jumping, can run varied distances at a good pace, and she's a kinesthetic learner. So she actually sort of likes to, what's called, perform the movement, and that's how she learns best rather than seeing it. So we come down, impairment, she's got a learning disability, so she's got an IQ of under 75 and has autism as well. We haven't got the good details on autism, we haven't got in-depth details on autism, so that'd be something we'd have to find out off Hannah and her family. Other information, Hannah has a one-to-one in school, so it has a one-to-one when in a school learning environment, but she also goes to a mainstream school. So from this point of view, when I've seen it before, when she comes to a session, we'd work with Hannah and we'd say, okay, we'd ask her a lot of questions, find out what she wants. It says there she has a one-to-one learning in a school learning environment, but I've had it many a time where somebody's had a one-to-one in a school learning environment, but when it comes to physical activity in sport, they don't need that one-to-one. So that means they could actually take part possibly in a mainstream session rather than a disability-specific session. Because obviously things that stand out there could be learning disability, autism, one-to-one in a school. And that could be thinking, alarm bells may ring with some coaches and sort of volunteers, but it's all about getting to know that individual and finding out what level of support they need. Because those things that could be anything she needs help with in school. So just find out what level of support she needs. So if you go now, how to use AIM and STEP. So you've got there, AIM. We figured out while speaking to that individual and while speaking to Hannah and her family, we figured out that an open setting is the best place for her to be. Her ability fits in well with a mainstream setting, and also because she goes to a mainstream school, her friends also attend this session. So we don't feel that she needs to go to a separate session because she could go there, she won't know anybody, and it'd be a setting that she wouldn't find enjoyable. But her friends attend this session, so we think actually, brilliant, come along to our mainstream session, the support you need is minimal. We've got the information from your family because they've given us in-depth information about what the coach needs to know about you, and some slight tweaks. You can take part in a mainstream session with everybody else, including your friends. So we'll go to the STEP acronym. For space, there's no alterations needed. It said there's nothing you need to know about because she doesn't need an extra lane, she doesn't need extra space, doesn't need to make distances shorter or longer. She can take part in the same space as everybody else. Task-wise, we want to find out the best way that she learns. And from that, that'll come down to, again, when she first comes to the club, using that sort of registration form, writing as much information down as possible, saying, what's the best way you learn, Hannah? What can I do? So when I coaching you, you can actually get the best out of a session. You can understand what I want you to do. She will tell you that information. And then again, you can adapt your coaching methods as you do for every single athlete. It doesn't matter if they're disabled or not. I think everyone coaches athletes the way they know that person wants to be coached. There are some similarities, but you all know what makes people tick, depending if they've got a disability or not. And that is the important thing here. Find out what gets Hannah involved and think about how can I basically get her enthusiastic about taking part. And that'd be find out how she learns best. Equipment, there's no alterations needed. And said people mixed group up to an even ability in certain races. So again, it comes back down to sort of the person-centered thing, trying to get them racing. You get them racing against each other in certain environments, but she may feel more comfortable trying to beat her own PB in her own personal best in other environments. So again, if she's doing a long jump, it could be trying to beat that individual jump, and then hopefully she will progress and progress and progress. Brilliant. That's example one. Example two, you've got Alan. He's interested in throws. So again, Alan's functional ability. He's new to seated throws. He can grip items that are round. He prefers lighter objects. He's also a visual learner, so when he sees something, he can go and do it. Performing movements can take time with Alan. So he may need that extra bit of support. And he take, for example, he may have to concentrate so much on a movement that it could take him a little bit longer. So from a coaching point of view, is finding this out beforehand and think, okay, actually, rather than rushing Alan, and say, actually, Alan, take your time, lots of patience, and then when you're ready to throw, concentrate and you can throw that object. Can self-propel his wheelchair short distances. So from my point of view, actually brilliant. He can get around the track or get to different areas of the track. He can get, for example, access to the building. He can hopefully, that'll be accessible, so he can get from the entrance to the track in minimum effort. Potential to balance on a seat unaided, but hasn't practiced in a long time. So again, this could be something about where does he start? Where do we start training from with Alan? How can he progress on to the actual seated chair? So to the throwing frame. What will he need to do in order to be able to balance on that chair? Can we give him extra exercises to help that core strength, help his balance? I guess about finding out what he can do. Impairment-wise, Alan has cerebral palsy and has a learning disability as well. So for cerebral palsy, it's a huge spectrum. You can get somebody with cerebral palsy who's a runner, can run 112 seconds, right the way to a power wheelchair user. And that's why it's important. So if somebody sends in a form to you and it says cerebral palsy on it, it's almost just email them back or ring them saying, actually, can you tell me a bit more about Alan's ability? You say you got cerebral palsy. Can you tell me, just tell me a bit more about him. What can he do? And they can say, actually, he's a chair user, and he'll tell you the information above and the function ability. He'll tell you all that information you need to know. And then from your point of view, then you can think, right, brilliant, I can start planning my session. Other information, Alan attends an SEN school. occasionally affected by seizures. Cold weather can affect the movement of Alan, basically. So if it's freezing cold outside, because he's got cerebral palsy, his muscles may become very stiff and rigid in the cold. He needs to be warm environment where he can sort of be loose and he can practice and he can throw. So in a cold environment, he may not perform as he would have in, say, a warmer environment. So it's all about thinking about these factors and like, yeah, okay, actually, I know in winter my track is absolutely freezing. So how can we get Alan participating throughout winter in an environment which he finds enjoyable and he's still getting coached? So we go on to aim now. So we go back to what environment we think what Alan wants to go into as well. So it starts off, we've decided with Alan, so he doesn't have to sit in one place either. Because Alan, he feels more confident going to a disability specific session. Mainly because in winter they go indoors, in the summer he's got a group of people with a similar ability to himself. But that doesn't mean he has to stay in that disability specific session. If his ability, if he starts becoming so more confident on a seated throw, and then he can get more balance, he could actually move to a modified setting. So he could go and practice with all the other throwers then, if he wanted to. But it's all about giving him that option. So just because he originally goes to a disability specific session, doesn't mean he has to stay there. Same if you want to go to modified, he can also regress back down to a disability specific session. It's about what suits that individual best and how they're feeling. So we put there, yes, he's not confident. The reason being he's not confident enough to join in with a mainstream setting yet. The coach in a disability session is more knowledgeable. So this could be where the club shares information among coaches. I think coaches' experience is probably one of the best. Coaches' experience is probably one of the most useful tools you can do in an athletics club. Finding out, okay, for example, that disability coach who runs that disability session, he could run a little sort of 20-minute seminar after training for the rest of the coaches and say, actually, we've got these athletes. This is what we do with these athletes. This is how we adapt those sessions. This is what equipment we use. That could give then other coaches in that club who have no disability athletics experience knowledge on basically, actually, yeah, he did that with this athlete. If he comes to my session, which I'd love him to, we can do that with him. And that's how the best way of finding people, the best way of learning is basically, yeah, copying good ideas of other people. They know a few members from the disability session, so that's why they think they're more confident going there because their friends are there, and that's it, so they can take part. And they train indoors in winter. So again, those are the reasons why we've sort of gone with a disability specific session, but leading on to a modified setting. So that's where we think there could be progression for that athlete. Stepwise, they may need more room to throw. So we've looked at the space and think, okay, yeah, they may need a bigger area to throw in just because at the moment that's best for that individual. Make sure that access to the track and facility is suitable. So they've got, when they turn up, are there sort of disability parking spaces? So one of my pet hates is when people park in those who don't have a disability badge or don't have an impairment, just because it's nearer the door. So think, have you got any say over who parks in those spaces? Task, so allow more time for the athlete to throw. Because the gentleman's got cerebral palsy, it may take that individual longer to perform a movement. That's because the messages from the brain are going down the central nervous system. They may take longer to get to that part of the body. And for that individual, they may need that extra bit of time. So just thinking about a bit of knowledge here. And yeah, take your time. If you're going to take 2 minutes, take 2 minutes. Absolutely fine. And then giving them the confidence, they can actually throw their object. So club throw could be more appropriate for the individual because he finds gripping rounder objects easier, and that movement where you almost throw the object, well, you throw the object many ways, but you can also throw it over your head back, you throw over your head backwards towards the actual thrown area, throw it sideways, whatever's best for that individual, and that comes down to their functional movement, and you find that out from basically training that individual. Equipment, so items that suit the individual's grip. It could be starting off with a beanbag because that's much easier to grip, it's nice and soft. It's got a good weight on it, so you can throw it, and it's easier to grip. You got to think about the club throw as well. Do you know somebody in your local authority who could possibly have one of those? Could it be linking with Welsh Athletics? Could it be linking with Disability Sport Wales? Asking them the question, saying, can we borrow some equipment, please? Because we've got this individual who'd love to take part, but as a club, we just don't have that equipment at the moment. You think tennis ball as well. Could that be better for individual? Still easy to throw, and that person can grip it as well. And finally, people, athlete can move on to a modified setting with non-disabled throwers in the future. So that's all we've got to think about from people-wise. He's in the disability setting with some ability, but he can also progress. And that's what we'd love to see, because the club can be more inclusive then, taking into account disabled athletes in different sections of the club then, rather than just the disability sports section. And finally, we've got Amelia. So eventually she wants to run the 200 and 400. So functionability, she can see contrasting colors at a close distance. So at 3 meters away, that'd be sort of the limit of her sight. So you can see just anything that stands out in a way. So you've got to think about the athletics track. It's probably a maroon, well, either bright blue or kind of an orange maroon color. Think about what colors stand out against that. And that could be asking the individual as well and saying, Amelia, what colors do you see best? And she could say, I see bright blue best. So you got to think, okay, everyone can wear a bright blue bib who's around her in a training group, because that means she can have an idea of where people are, or just have the coach in a bright blue one, everybody else in different colors, so she knows that's her coach. She plays goalball at a local club. So goalball is a visually impaired sport where they kind of throw balls from one end of a sort of a pitch to the other to try and score goals. So we know from her functioning ability, she's quite sporty and she's got good awareness as well. So that's for the bell. The ball's got a bell in it, so she can tell where it's coming from. So she knows she's been coached before. So again, that could lead to questions about, in your goalball club, what do they do that you find really useful from a coaching perspective, which gets you involved and you know exactly what they're doing. Said she used to race when she was in secondary school. So again, you got that functionality knowing actually, yeah, in secondary school, she used to run. So there's a bit of past experience there about athletics. And also, she's more confident to run with family members at the moment. So again, that could be a case of just saying, right, family member, do you want to stay for a little bit? Help until she feels confident to run with, say, a volunteer in the club, could a family member help out? She prefers auditory and she's an auditory and kinesthetic learner. So she likes lots of verbal instruction. That's how that's how Amelia's going to learn. And again, kinesthetic wise, she has to do the activity to learn the activity as well. So as you can tell from the functioning ability, hopefully you got a good idea that her impairment is visually impaired. But again, that's from the impairment bit. It does come after the functionability, because the functionability for me is more important than what her impairment is. Other information, she hasn't run in 3 years due to a loss of confidence. And this is where she's got that confidence to come to your club. So when she comes there, you want to give her the best experience possible, because that could have taken her a lot of courage she doesn't remember 3 years and she wants to come now and think, right, I'm ready now, I want to take part. If she gets to your club and there's somebody, the first person she meets is like, oh, I don't know, we haven't got any visually impaired runners, I'm not sure we can cater for you. That could have a massive impact. She could say, okay, no problem, I'll just go home and not take part anymore. If that first person who meets her goes, actually, yeah, brilliant, come in, we'd love to have you taking part in our club. What can we do that makes it suitable for you? Tell us what we need to do, and we'll hopefully be able to cater for everything you can do. Okay, so go to AIM, modified setting. She feels confident enough to train with a non-disabled athletes. So we've gone brilliant. You can get into one of our sort of 200 squads, 400 squads and practice. Family members can guide until someone from the club can support her. Because you can't expect an athletics club just to say, right, we've got a bank of it's called guide runners who can take part with you. We're ready waiting for you. So it could be a case of, do you mind if a family member takes part just for the first session, so we can actually gain some ideas from what's best, the best way that Amelia takes part. And then once you have members in the club, you may have some other members coming forward with volunteering. So actually, I'll be a guide runner for her and I'll help her out. So that's all I say. Don't expect to have everything straight away, because it's all about a learning experience for yourselves as well as the runner as well. And you want them to have that best experience. So again, step, you can offer 2 lanes to sprint in for space, decrease the distance to begin with. So you can see actually just so she gets confident running with a guide runner. And so you do short races rather than going, okay, first of all, we're going to do a 200-meter race, 200-meter run, off we go. Get her running, sort of figuring out what she feels confident with. She could be very confident running 100 meters. So brilliant, okay, we'll start with that. Excellent, that's what we want to do, finding out, working with her, what she feels comfortable with. Task, you offer a guide. That's probably one of the things I would do. You never know, she may say, no, I don't need a guide, I just need lots of verbal instruction. So tell me when to start, tell me when to stop. Use sound, so I can run towards sound, so I know which direction I'm running in. That could be a way. You could have somebody, you could almost have a guide runner in front of her. So she's not using a tether, but she has somebody in front of her who's got a bib on which she can see, and then she can follow that person. That could be different ways of guiding. So that could be one she feels more comfortable with. Equipment, what tether would suit the individual best? It could be many tether, it could be sort of like a short bit of string, it could be some physio tape, it could be anything what that person feels comfortable with. And that's what both athletes hold on to when they're guiding. Color contrasts. So again, thinking about what stands out, what colors she finds that are vibrant and she can see. So the equipment you use then, for example, cones and bibs, could be those colours, and they could stand out a lot more than they could if they were just, say, an orange cone or an orange track. That may not be beneficial to her whatsoever. I think it's called trained with similar paced athletes as well. So that could be the people section. Again, think actually what section does she fit into our club? What will she get more out of if she's she's trained with similar ability to athletes? She's going to be pushed as well. If she's trained with athletes who, for example, are not as sort of fast as her, she's going to get bored and think I'm winning every time. If it's too fast for her, again, she may get a bit sort of disheartened. So find out where to fit her in your club. So hopefully those are three. Those are three examples there. There's not one size fits all for any individual or any impairment group. It's all about using the AIM model and the STEP model, speaking to that individual, finding out what you can provide for them and what they need as well. You said you may not be able to provide everything, but you're working with them to hopefully provide a lot of things so they can take part in your club and have the best experience. Right, that's it from me now, but I want to pass you over to Nathan. So Nathan's going to go through classification for you. Okay, Nathan?
Yep. Evening all. As Simon said, so my name's Nathan Stevens. I'm one of the performance pathway officers for Disability Sport Wales. So just going to go through the classification for athletics. They are split into three groups. We've got the physical impairments, the learning difficulties, or the intellectual impairments, and then the sensory impairments as well. Obviously, physical impairments range from cerebral palsy, spinal injuries, amputees, short stature, limb deficiencies, so pretty self-explanatory. Intellectual impairments are anyone for INUS who has an IQ of under 75, as I said there. And then sensory, it's visual impairments and hearing impairments. For anybody wanting to compete at a Paralympic level, the visual impairment has to be in both eyes. And for hearing impairment to compete in the Deaf Olympics, they have to have a hearing loss of 50 decibels or more in their strongest ear. So it's just a little bit of information around that, because if someone comes to your club and wants to know what the pathway is for them, it's always good to have that level of information so you can make sure that they're on the right pathway. And obviously the purpose of classification for all sports is to ensure that they're grouped together in groups that makes it a fairer playing field. Obviously, each classification has a spectrum, so you have a lower end of the classification and an upper end of the classification, which is very similar to any ambulant or non-disabled group. You're always going to have the superstars, and you're always going to have individuals who just want to compete recreationally. Next slide for me, Si. So this is the breakdown of classifications for Paralympics and Paralympic pathway. So 11 to 13 are the visual impairments. The lower number in the classification is always the more impaired. So an 11 is either completely blind or an extreme impairment in the visual fields. I think it's less than 5%. And then you've got 13 who is classed as blind, but has a greater level of sight. And obviously one of the examples that Si gave earlier in some of the impairments and the adaptations needed is that a class 11 will always run with a guide, and they will always have to be tethered to run. 12 has the option of running with a guide, or if they're at the top end of that classification, could choose to run without a guide. But obviously for training and group purposes, it's understanding that individual and understanding their level of sight, because some may have peripheral vision and have a blind spot in the middle. Others may have tunnel vision and can't see anything around them. So it's always good to just get that level of information from the athletes to ensure that you can create an environment that is suited to their functional ability. Your T20 athletes or F20 athletes are athletes with intellectual impairments. For Paralympic pathway, they must have an IQ less than 75. For Special Olympics and INES events, there are classifications for autism and other intellectual impairments. And if you require more information on that, then we're more than happy to send that through to you if you get in contact with us. Again, adaptations or considerations, Si already picked up on one of the slides. It is around that coaching and how you communicate with the athletes, because all of them will have certain cues or pressures to their environment, and it's really about understanding the athlete in that. But any physical adaptations, there shouldn't be much need to be considered for that. Now we go into one of the more complex classifications, and that is your 30 classes, which originally was just for cerebral palsy, but now it's for neurological impairments. So they could be individuals who are born with cerebral palsy, or stroke patients or stroke victims that portray similar disabilities to one of cerebral palsy. So it's anything that's neurological that affects your physical and functional ability. Your 32 to 34s are either wheelchair users or need assistance to compete in their event. So for your seated throwers, you'll be in a 32 to 34 classification. 32, which is again the more severely impaired athletes, which again are allowed to throw club, which takes place of the javelin. So 32s, due to their functional ability, can't grip or grasp onto a javelin safely. So this is why they are now permitted to throw club rather than javelin. And also shot and disc is also an event for them. And another thing obviously these are all seated throwers. When you've got someone coming into your environment or your club, don't automatically think that they need to throw from a throwing frame. This is a more advanced bit of equipment, so it's more than adequate and acceptable to get them throwing from their day chairs or a chair or any mode of seated, anything that allows them to be able to throw comfortably and safely. When you get up to the 34s, this is your more ambulant individual with a neurological impairment. You may find that they may start by standing and throwing, but can actually benefit a lot more from actually seated and throwing. So that's just getting to know the athlete and progressing and coaching the athlete as you find them as they progress. Your 35s to 38s are your ambulant individuals with neurological impairments. So again, all throws are available to them apart from hammer. So shot put, javelin, discus, and then if they're a track athlete, then again they can run any distance. The adaptations and considerations needed for these are recovery times. And again, this is very much down to if it's congenital or acquired impairments. The recovery times are different for each. So if they are training in the mainstream environment or non-stable environment, just be considerate of that they may need a little bit longer to rest before they are able to complete the next set or rep. And again, as Simon alluded to earlier, the environment and the temperatures can have a very dramatic effect on their ability to recover. So a cold environment is very detrimental to an individual's cerebral palsy. They do stiffen up, and especially on their type of cerebral palsy, if they have a high spasticity grades, then they can tighten up, and it can cause quite severe injuries if they train while being that tight. So this is another consideration to have. And again, you'll find out this by asking them the questions when you do the athlete referral registration forms. It's just having a greater understanding of what affects them and what they're comfortable training in. And obviously going back to the seated, obviously wheelchair racing is for 33s to 34s. There is no wheelchair racing event for 32s because 32s are predominantly electric wheelchair users. But there are other events that 32s can do if they don't choose to throw. So obviously there's wheelchair slalom and other events that are available to them in cerebral palsy games and cerebral palsy events. Going on to the 40s, These are classed as les autres or the others, as well as amputees. So 40 to 41s are athletes with short stature. Adaptations and considerations for these, they don't do track events because this can have quite severe implications on hip joints, knee joints, and ankle joints. They're more than happy for considerations. They can run short distances for training, but the throws are open to them at Paralympic level and pathway level. Weights, they throw, the seniors throw a 4 kilo shot put. So if you have a male, a senior male, they throw 4 kilo in shot put, a 1 kilo disc and a 600 gram javelin. Females throw 3 kilo shots, 1 kilo javelin and a 600 gram javelin as well. 600 gram jav. Going into the 42s and the 44s, these have recently changed. These are now athletes with lower limb impairments, but not amputees. So these are now athletes with clubfoot, limb deficiencies or limb length differences, all in the lower limbs. So 42 is your single or double above knee impairments. Your 44s, your 43s are below knee impairments, where both legs. 44s are above knee, single below knee impairments. And again, wide variety of events for them, adaptations or considerations. It would be just the load going through their affected limbs. If you've got a single leg impaired athlete, ensure that the rest is adequate to rest the limbs moving forwards. And for training, it's just main considerations is just around the training environment and intensity, similar to all the classifications. For your 45 to 47s, these are the upper limb impairments. So you could have Herb's palsy, which is almost a frozen shoulder, or any paralysis in the upper limbs. Again, throws and track available to these, and not much considerations needed on impairments or adaptations, especially if only for the 45s who would be a double arm impairment, which there would be no throws available for them. Then you get into the 50 classifications, which are your wheelchair, your wheelchair impairments. So again, all les autres. So these are your athletes who need to compete in a seated position. So whether that be wheelchair racing or seated throws. For track, you've got 51 to 54. These are wheelchair racers, 51 being high level tetra impairment, 54 being anything from a low level spinal injury to a double leg amputee or single leg amputee who chooses to use a wheelchair to race. For anybody coming into your club wanting to try wheelchair racing, these are expensive bits of equipment, but most of them would have a day chair. So I would advise just getting them to practice pushing technique in their day chair until they can afford or can get access to, or the club can get access to, a racing wheelchair. For 51s to 57s, this is the throwing classification. Again, severity of impairment is 51s, you are high level tetra, high level spinal injuries. 51s also have access to throw club, so club and discus for 51s, and then obviously it progresses up to 57, which is the most able impairment for a seated thrower. And again, shot put, javelin, discus are available to these athletes throwing from the seated position. And again, the same as the 32s to 34s, try and find, if they haven't got their own chair, or day chair to throw from, either throw from stool, a normal chair, until you can get access to a throwing frame. And then we come into the new classifications, which are the 61s to 64s. These are athletes with lower leg amputations who run with prosthetics. So you've got your 61s, which are your double above knee amputations. So your Richard Whiteheads, who run with 2 blades. Your 62s are your double below knee amputations, so 2 below knee prosthetics. Your 63, which would be your single above knee amputation, and your 64 is your single below knee amputation. They can run on their standard day legs. They don't need specific sprint blades to run on for a beginner. So just get them running and learning proper technique as you would with any athlete. And as they progress through the system, then funding becomes available to purchase running blades. Also, from next year, the NHS are providing beginner blades for athletes just wanting to participate in sport. So that is an option for all clubs to be aware of when they have an athlete with an amputee who approaches them and is looking to get a blade to run on. But any more information on that can be given out, say, just get in contact with us at Disability Sport Wales. Other adaptations and considerations needed for any of these events are obviously the weight and implements. I did allude to some of them throughout the presentation. The only athletes who throw mainstream and non-disabled weights are your F20s and your F11s and 13s. So your visually impaired athletes and your intellectually impaired athletes are the only athletes who throw the same weights as non-disabled athletes. And the implement wait lists can be available by ourselves if you require them, and we can email them out if you have any more questions. That is it. There's a whistle-stop tour on classification without going into far too much depth.
Brilliant. Cool. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Let's go to, I think, I've got one more slide, and because, well, we finished there. So there's the Disability Sport Wales contact details. Website's probably the most easiest one to get us, or the phone number easiest to get us on. So that's it for today. So thank you to Nathan. That was absolutely brilliant. And well, back over to Zoe now, see if you've got any questions.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks so much. Very, very insightful presentation, and I'm sure that there'll be lots of people who find that very useful. So question perhaps, well, probably for both of you actually, are there any disability specific sessions available in Cardiff?
Oh, Nathan, do you want to take this, or do you want me to go for it?
We, Disability Sport Wales, does have an athletics club. We are a registered athletics club that does cater for athletes who have Paralympic impairments. So the impairments that I just went through in the last slide. I believe also there is a club out of Cardiff Met, Cardiff Archers, who do also have an intellectual impairment club as well.
Yep.
One other question, what does high level tetra mean?
Sorry, so high level tetra is, so it's a spinal injury and it's an athlete with who suffers with tetraplegic. So so their break level is extremely high. So I believe it is, I can't think of the number, but it's someone who's affected in all 4 limbs. So they can't, their grasp and release in their hands is affected, no tricep function, and paralyzed pretty much from the chest down.
Right. Can we have a little bit of information around the performance pathway? So I know that there'll be people out there who are quite interested in terms of how they access that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Disability Sport Wales, we have just launched our Inspire form that has, it's pretty much a registration form to come straight to ourselves. Once that registration form is filled in, we can either work with your local club to ensure that all the adaptations and considerations are made locally, or if you are based in the Cardiff or Aberystwyth area, so we do have performance pathway hubs that you can access, which will then give you a wide range of training opportunities through us. So currently, that form can be found on our performance page on the website or by contacting us directly.
Great stuff, gentlemen. Thank you so much again. We are really appreciative of you giving up your evening, and for all of you guys watching out there, again, it's been a long summer, I think, for everybody, and I'm sure there's been lots of webinar activity out there, but we really appreciate your engagement. And as Simon and Nathan both said, if you want to get in contact with them, or you want to get in contact with Welsh Athletics, you can also email me, zoe.brown@welshathletics.org, and if you've got any questions that are relevant to either party, we are more than happy to answer them. So this is the final webinar in the Stay Involved series, gentlemen. So you've rounded it off very nicely. Thanks very much.
No problem at all.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Good night, everybody.